Meet Mr. A. Every morning, Mr. A strolls into the office at 9 a.m., swiping his badge with perfect enthusiasm. He hits a few meetings, grabs coffee with colleagues, and keeps the daily buzz going. But here's the twist. Come noon, he sneaks out, heading home to wrap up his work in comfort. By around 5, he's clocked out. Mission accomplished. Mr. A has redefined the 9 to 5 in his own terms. And interestingly, this trend also has a name.
A new trend emerging in the back to office push, and that is coffee badging.
Coffee badging is two worlds colliding. It's employers wanting to get their workers back into the office, and employees desire to really have more flexibility on the job. And so that's coming together in this trend of coffee badging.
Coffee badging is happening because workers are using this as a soft revolt against the return to office mandates that companies have put out. And they just badge in, have a coffee, check in with their colleagues, do some work, and then leave their office early.
It is a silent protest of saying, I just want to be home.
Coffee badging was a term that Owl Labs coined as part of its 2023 State of Hybrid Work report. And what we found is that employees weren't necessarily returning to the office in a traditional 8 to 5 manner 5 days a week, but they were coffee badging. Some were going in just to show face, grab a cup of coffee, say hi to some of their colleagues, maybe their boss, so that they could check the box for their company's return to office mandate. Whereas others were going into the office for different periods of time, maybe for reasons that the office offered them luxuries that the home environment didn't, which is access to technology, which was meeting with colleagues or being in-person meetings.
A lot of the workplace trends that we're seeing right now are very much reflective of what's happening in the overall job market.
The overall U.S. economy is performing well, but the job market is cooling. A closer look at the monthly job creation over the past 2 years reveals the broader trend, with the labor market adding just 227,000 jobs in November. Some experts note that workplace trends often mirror the job market. During the pandemic, when workers' demand was high, quiet quitting became the dominant workplace theme.
That's actually just what I was going to say. Is I made a video on quiet quitting a couple of years ago, and at that time there was around 2 job openings for every person looking for work. So it was kind of, you had your pick of the lot, right? If you were a job seeker, you had all of the leverage, whereas in today's economy there's definitely been some cooling, and they say that we're not in a recession yet, but we definitely are. You know, a recession used to be categorized as 2 quarters consecutively of negative GDP growth, and we had that back in, I think, 2023, the first part there. But they've kind of redefined what that meant. But right now, the economy is not doing as good as it was back then. So now we're kind of in this economy where the employers have more of the leverage than they did back when people were quiet quitting.
Now, as the job market is tighter, particularly for white-collar jobs, coffee badging is trending.
Workplace trends reflect what's happened in the job market largely because you can tell who has the power. During COVID, the employees had the power. Employers were scared to death of losing employees, and it was a tight job market. And it was very difficult to get qualified employees in the door. These days, the employer has the power because even though the job market fundamentally is still good, it's not nearly as strong as it used to be. So employees can't job hop the way that they did 2 or 3 years ago. Now, from the perspective of the employer, it's, look, we gave you your time, now it's our time. You're going to come back to the office, and if you don't like it, you can go elsewhere.
Dynamics that we saw in the labor force a couple of years ago were very unusual. The issue is that we had much fewer workers, and a lot of power had really shifted towards employees and away from employers in the workforce relationship. That's one of the reasons we saw quiet quitting, because there was just a lot of demand for workers and people weren't that worried about losing their jobs in that kind of an environment. Whereas now we have an environment that's much more balanced.
Productivity has long been a contentious issue for supporters and critics of remote work, with mixed results and studies measuring its impact. For instance, October 2024 research from the Bureau of Labor Statistics found that productivity increased with the rise of remote work across 61 private sector industries from 2019 to 2021. However, a major July 2023 study by Stanford's Institute for Economic Policy Research reported that fully remote work is linked to about 10% lower productivity than fully in-person work.
So studies are not clear on whether remote work makes you more or less productive.
So what they're saying here is that the studies are saying different things, but Stanford, who is probably got pretty reputable research, is saying that there's a 10% decrease in productivity when people are working from home. Now, if you're saying 10% decrease in productivity, you would have to kind of assume that there would be a 10% decrease in revenue, right? But let me just look at this. What percentage of a company's revenue is typically spent on real estate whether that be rent or loans. So I just want to see this really quick. So this is ChatGPT's synopsis. In office-based businesses, you're looking at 5 to 10% of your revenue goes to the actual building that your employees are going to be in. Whereas with retail, industrial manufacturing, and hospitality, those rates are different, but all of those would be jobs that would demand somebody to be in person. What we're really talking about here when it comes to coffee badging is office-based businesses. So there's an argument to be made that, look, you might be able to save 10% in real estate costs, but you're going to lose 10% in productivity. It's kind of a trade-off. And to be honest, if that data is accurate, I don't blame employers for playing it safe and wanting to keep people in the office with a model that's worked in the past versus, maybe, hey, let's get rid of some of our real estate. Let's go fully remote. It's definitely a new business model, which introduces new risk.
There is mixed evidence there, but there are perceptions that coming together can increase productivity.
The reason there's no clear answer on this one is because it's incredibly hard to measure how remote work is impacting productivity. So it really depends on the job. It depends on the skill and the task that you're trying to complete, what industry you're in, what kind of worker you are. That makes it incredibly hard to get an exact answer to.
I agree.
Is remote work good or bad for productivity?
When I look at the relationship between at home work versus in the office work as it relates to productivity, I have a different perspective than a lot of people because I'm not going to debate, the empirical numbers. I'm going to simply say one thing. Productivity is ultimately in the eyes of the beholder. Who has the power? In the case of the company, if the company is paying your salary, the company is giving you a paycheck, and the company says in order to justify your productivity, you need to be in the office, you have to be in the office.
The fact is that...
I think he's right there. If companies are the ones that are paying your bills, then they do have the right to demand certain things or to ask certain things from you, especially where you work, right? But people also have the option to walk away from jobs like those. And I think what's easy to forget for CEOs who are so detached from maybe the typical 9-to-5 rat race is that working from home, working remote really is an extra form of compensation. Because you think about it, right? If you're working from home, even if it's just one day a week, that's a day that you can start to catch up on things like laundry, start the dishwasher while you're working. While you're still locked in at work, you can just go drop something in the laundry and get that going in the background, right? You're saving money on gas, right? You're saving money maybe eating out because you can eat at home. So there's a lot of little extra bonuses that come with working remote or working from home that I think companies forget. And a lot of times companies don't want to pay people more. And we're in an economy right now where people are looking for every single dime and nickel that they can. Money's tight. Working from home is a way that you can give extra money to your employees without actually having to pay any extra because they're saving money and they're having more time to catch up on all of the chores and things that they would normally have to do during the weekend. It really is an extra form of compensation.
That bosses like to have people on the premises. I've spent most of my career as an editor-in-chief, and I liked to have people in the office. And there's something to be said. I totally am very empathetic to the idea of culture and mentorship and creativity and all of those things. But that said, there is a reason why hybrid remote work remains so prevalent, and the reason is that it works.
News reports of companies mandating in-person work have been dominating headlines recently, with studies also highlighting crackdowns on the coffee badging trend. Owl Labs data shows 44% of hybrid employees still coffee badge. That's down 24% from 20.
I just got to look up really quick, where did this term coffee badging come from? I guess it's still not clear to me. Maybe I'm missing something. The term coffee badging is a playful term that describes a specific workplace behavior in which employees make a brief appearance at the office, just enough to badge in, often symbolically grab a coffee, and then leave to work remotely or somewhere else. Okay, so it's the idea that you just come in, grab a coffee, show face, and leave. Okay, I'm just making sure that we all got the same definition here.
Meanwhile, 70% of coffee badgers have been caught, with 16% now forced to be in office for the full day. Interestingly, some companies are also using badge data or swipe data as a tool to promote, demote, or even lay off employees.
So I wrote a book called The Algorithm about how AI is used in the workforce, to hire people, but also to monitor employees. And one of the folks that I talked to was an analyst at Gartner. One of the companies he was working with, what they did is they looked at we want to find the people that we haven't really promoted before. How can we do this? So this company came up with this idea to look at badge data. So the people who badged in early and badged out late, who had very long hours at the desk, were supposed to be more promotable than others. The unfortunate thing about that company was also when the pandemic hit and they started to have to do layoffs, they wanted to look at this kind of badging in, badging out data to understand who are the people that leave early, that have the fewest hours in the seats, and they were going to look at those to lay off.
The push by
Yeah, I just got to say, time in office, the amount of time that you're spending behind a desk is not a great proxy or indication of productivity, right? And I feel like a lot of companies and CEOs think it is because they themselves perceive, I'm in my company a lot, or the people who are engaged with the work a lot like I am, they're putting in the same amount of effort, or they're putting in more effort like I am when I work long hours. But I've definitely seen, just anecdotally, at the places that I've worked, that there are people who work longer hours that get less done than the person who comes in, busts stuff out, and tries to get out earlier, tries to get out right on time, right? Just because you're in the office for a certain amount of time doesn't mean that the work you're doing while you're there is as maximized or is as efficient as possible. And I've had days where I'm working extra, but I kind of messed around for a little bit of the day, right? So I might be at work for 8 or 9 hours, but it's like, I really only got maybe 6 good hours of work done. Whereas I've had days where I'm in the office for maybe 7 hours, I have to leave for an appointment, but those 7 hours could have been 8 or 9 hours of work because I was on top of it the entire day. So this idea that time is a good proxy for productivity, I just totally disagree with it.
By some companies against flexible work is apparent in job postings with fewer remote roles. LinkedIn data shows flexible work stabilizing at 1 in 5 listings since November 2023, down from a peak of over 1 in 4 between October 2022 and March of 2023. Indeed's chart also shows a decline in remote and hybrid job listings since their 2022
So remote
peak.
work is on
As the
decline.
world reopened post-pandemic, corporate America shifted its stance on remote work. Companies like Amazon now mandate employees to return to the office 5 days a week
Not
or risk
surprised
losing
it's
their
Amazon.
jobs.
Company's cloud chief, Matt Garman, saying during an all-hands meeting that staffers who don't agree with the policy, well, they can leave. According to the transcript that was viewed by CNBC, he said the following, in quotes, if there are people who just don't work well in that environment and don't want to, that is okay. There are other companies around.
There are a lot of employers, I'm saying small to mid-sized employers, who are waiting on a juggernaut like Amazon to officially go ahead and push forward with a 5-day work policy, because their bank account is basically the size of a small country's economy. And this is just an Amazon attitude, is if you don't like it, go someplace else. Other employers, and I'm hearing this behind closed doors, employers are really happy that Amazon's pushing this, because if Amazon's doing it, now we can follow suit.
Yeah, that's the thing, is when you've got a company as big as Amazon that starts to set these expectations for what their workplace is going to look like, a lot of smaller workplaces just assume, Amazon's got the teams for research. They've got the money for all of the right analysts and consultants that they're going to have the best answers. So I'll just do what Amazon does. But Amazon, as we've seen in the past, doesn't exactly have the best workplace culture that people love working for.
I don't think that the 5-day work week is something that you're going to see generally. It's the fact that Amazon has opted to go that direction doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is going to move in lockstep with what they did.
One of the reasons employers can get more workers back into the office because there just isn't as much mobility as there was a few years ago. You don't see as many workers moving. And in fact, 2 in 5 workers tell us that they feel stuck in their job.
Amazon, who's now mandating all of their employees come back 5 days a week. And employees have been up in arms about that. They don't want that.
The last headline said that bringing people back, return to office, is a way for companies to kind of slyly get rid of people. It's a backdoor layoff. And I definitely think that there's some truth in that, because I've heard some family members that work for really big companies, a lot of people quit, and the companies are not quick to hire those positions back, if at all. And so I really do think it is one of those things where they're like, well, let's just get rid of everybody that we deem lazy. We've got to get rid of people anyways, because we're in a silent recession.
They want to keep their flexibility. It remains to be seen if this is going to have a huge ripple effect, if other employers are going to mandate the same thing.
CNBC reached out to Amazon regarding its 5-day office work policy. The company stated that the policy was needed to ensure that its team stays connected to invent, collaborate, and deliver the best results for its customers and business.
What they're saying there is that, you've got to come to the office so we can collaborate. And that's one of the arguments that I've heard from a lot of CEOs and with a lot of buddies that have been forced to go back to office. That's what they're hearing from their bosses as well, is that, look, we're not going to be able to invent, collaborate, innovate, blah, blah, blah. We're not going to be able to do these things where we work together as well if you guys are remote. To which I would say, Managers have an extreme bias on this because what is being a manager? Being a manager is a job where you're supposed to interact with people, give them the tools they need, make sure that they're getting work done. And it's a job that's very heavy on interaction with people. But at the actual worker level, right, if we're imagining a pyramid and the manager's at the top of a team, the actual worker level towards the bottom there, how much of your work revolves around collaborating with people? You know, I can't speak to every industry, but I've got buddies in tech, right? Their average week might be 20% meetings and 80% working solo. That deep work that they have to go and do by themselves. So if you're telling people that they need to go back to the office for collaboration, but 80% of their work is work that they have to do solo anyways, or that they have to be in their own mind, they're not communicating while they do that work. Why would you have them come back to the office for 5 days a week? In my job, for instance, I could say probably 40% of my work, 50% of my work is completely solo, and there's about 50% that's collaboration. So if somebody was going to say, look, you should not work from home at all, I would say, well, what's the point of that 50% I'm going to do solo anyways? Why can't I be at home starting my laundry, right? It's kind of like this idea that managers are the ones that set expectations, but they're living a different experience from their actual workers. There's a little bit of a disconnect. And I'll just say as a worker too, that one of the frustrating things that can happen by working in office, right, is if you do have a lot of that deeply personal work that you need to do, the stuff where you've got to get deep into your thoughts and tackle these big issues, and you don't need any extra help or any extra opinions, it's just you and the task at hand, but you're in an office and distractions are coming your way, that's one of the most frustrating things, because now you've got work piling up, work taking extra time than it needs to because of where you're actually working at. So while the office can be good for the collaboration and the ability to innovate with others, bounce ideas back and forth, problem solve in groups, when it comes down to actually doing your own work, I think it can be a little bit of a hindrance. So if in this capitalist system, we're looking for productivity to be, the number one thing that we're shooting for is we want maximum productivity, I think a hybrid schedule is actually probably the best option. And that hybrid schedule should be tailored to the amount of personalized work that people need to do, right? If 20% of my work is work where I don't need to talk to anybody at all, it is just me locking in data entry, let's say, there's no reason to have me in an office where I can possibly get distracted or waste time, or people come to me with other problems. You get what I'm saying? I think where you work should be reflective of what kind of work you do and how much of it is individual versus how much of it is collaborative.
The push against remote work isn't limited to companies. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, the co-leaders of the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, are proposing a 5-day in-office work week for federal employees, raising doubts about the future of flexible work and the coffee badging trend.
See, now again, I wouldn't be surprised if they're saying that specifically to weed out a lot of people from the federal government, because I think these guys have talked about wanting to downsize the federal government by as much as 50%. That's a way to get started, right? You make a 5-day in-office policy because people don't want to put up with that. And I get it. I'm not blaming the people, but I think that's why they're doing it.
Yeah, when I look at the future of flexible work, here's what I see. Depending on the industry, flexible work might be the thing to be. If you happen to work in a technological industry, you can work remotely. It doesn't necessarily require that you to come in the office versus if you're in a human resources function, if you're a warehouse function, if you're in something director of operations, that's going to force you to continue to come into work because you need to be hands-on. So what we're essentially going to see in the future is going to look a lot like the past.
It's very clear when you look at the data on LinkedIn that employees prefer flexible work. So they're going to be looking for those hybrid options, those remote options, wherever they can get them. And they're going to be looking to make work for them, as they did during the pandemic.
I think the coffee badging phenomenon is indicative of the type of adjustments that we're going to see going forward as we see a normalization of the relationship between employees and employers, and expectations about whether people will be working at home or whether they'll be working in the office. So I think that's it's perhaps a symptom of those types of adjustments as workers kind of seek out what are the appropriate norms with their employers, and as employees kind of seek out just how much engagement they need with their employees to have them be productive and well connected to their enterprise.
Coffee badging exists and will continue to exist because employees are looking for that level of flexibility to be able to choose the environment that allows them to be most productive, and it gives them the best flexibility, but it is also a way for them to be able to meet the return to office mandate that their company has.
I think a conversation that needs to be had too is a lot of the return to office policy is very clearly, to me, companies fighting for control, fighting to have control, or their perceived control, over what people are doing with 100% of their time, the 5 days a week that they're paying for. And I think it's kind of lazy in a way. I understand why companies are doing that. They want to protect their investment of paying people, a salary or a certain wage. They want to make sure that they're actually getting what they're paying for. But the reason that I say it's lazy is because if your managers are so out of touch with the actual work that people do on a daily basis that they can't appraise the actual work getting done, if they don't know how to grade the quality of work and the quantity of work that somebody is delivering to them, then they probably shouldn't be a manager, right? What I mean by that is if somebody's in the office or if somebody's at home, the same projects have to get done. If the timetable suddenly sucks while it's at home, then a manager should be able to identify that. If the timetable is really good and people are actually more productive at home, a manager should be able to identify that. This idea that they need to be there in person so that companies feel comfortable and safe with it, I think is just a lazy way for companies to feel like, to pretend. Because if you have a good manager in position, you can tell whether or not that work is getting done, regardless of where it's getting done.